Welcome to Psych Talk. I'm your host, Dr. Jessica Rabin, a licensed clinical psychologist. If you are a mental health professional, student in the social science field, or just interested in psychology and mental health, this podcast is for you. Although topics discussed on this podcast are similar to therapy, Psych Talk is not a replacement for therapy and is for educational and entertainment purposes only. So let's dive into today's episode. Hey everyone, welcome back to Psych Talk, and thank you so much for joining me for today's episode. Today I have a very special guest with me, Drew Davis, who is the Director of Health Equity and Strategic Initiatives at SafeBAE. So Drew, thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk with you.
I am excited to talk with you as well. So before we jump into our discussion, can you introduce yourself, a little bit about your background, what you do, and anything else you want to share?
Yeah, so I'm Drew, and as you said, I'm the Director of Health Equity and Strategic Initiatives at SafeBAE, and I come to this work with a background in theory and research in sort of public health and gender-based violence and mental health, as well as in my prior role to coming to SafeBAE, I was doing policy work around Title IX. Here at SafeBAE, I do a little bit of anything and everything in the day-to-day, but I really see the majority of what my work is focused on is in ensuring and I hope in enhancing our ability to continue doing this work. And so day to day that looks very different depending on the day or sometimes the minute, but everything from our grant writing and reporting to sort of our community and school partners to talking with amazing folks like you who care about these same issues, anything that gets our work out in the world and builds up sort of our youth leadership and all the work that we're doing.
Yeah, I love that. So you wear many hats.
Many hats. Yeah, I do a little bit of everything.
Which, I know we've connected, we've chatted before, so I don't know you super well, but I know you. I feel like maybe you like that, like to do a lot of different things, dip your hands in.
Yes, I love, I really see myself as being the person behind the scenes of sort of everything that we're doing and giving the tools, the resources, the time and attention to whatever everyone else is working on. We have so many young people who are doing such visionary work. So I really see myself just equipping them with literally whatever and anything that they need. And so that always looks different.
Yeah. So let's talk about SafeBAE. Can you tell listeners what SafeBAE is, a little bit about the organization, their mission, anything you want to share?
Yeah, so SafeBAE, which stands for Safe Before Anyone Else, is a national organization working to prevent sexual assault and dating violence among teens across the country. And so we were founded a decade ago, which is wild that we've been around for 10 years. But we were founded after a Netflix documentary, Audrey and Daisy, came out, and we were founded by a group of young survivors who were featured in that documentary, as well as our executive director, Shale Norris. And they really came together to create this organization to do a handful of different things. One was really focused on sort of bridging art and activism around sexual violence. And so they leveraged this amazing documentary to start conversations in schools across the country about how prevalent this issue was and what it actually looks like for young survivors. And we continue sort of that legacy through our own educational short films and our media commentary that we're doing all the time. So bridging art and activism is one of the core pillars of what SafeBAE is doing. The other piece was around sort of bypassing adult gatekeeping and really putting things into the hands of young people and putting power to young people. And so the approach was really about, can we make sure that young people have all the skills, knowledge, authority to make decisions around these issues and to really lead this work. And so these visionary founders who just did such an amazing job building out this youth leadership model really created where we are today, which is equipping young people with everything they need to tackle these issues in their communities.
Yeah. No, I love that your organization is youth-led. I know when we connected, a couple months ago at this point, you told me you're the second oldest person.
Yeah.
And you are over a decade younger than me. So you're not old by any means, but you know, you talked about like adult gatekeeping. And yes, I mean, I think there's a time and place for adults to obviously be involved, do their advocacy. But if your entire organization is focused on sexual violence and dating violence in teens, teens are going to know better than anyone else what that looks like, what their lived experiences or the lived experience of their friends, or, you know, and we'll talk more about all the programming you do, but like, you know, what their schools are doing or not doing, what it's like to be a teen in high school in the United States in 2026. Because I don't know what that's like. You don't know what that's like. So the fact that, because correct me if I'm wrong, you're the only youth-led organization with regard to sexual violence. Is that correct?
Working nationally, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is amazing.
Yeah, and I just to plug our approach, I just always love to share this because I think it's super important into understanding what that actually looks like. And so in our governing bylaws that allow our organization to exist, 2/3 of our actual board of directors is young people under the age of 24.
Wow.
Which is wild, right? It's not a separate youth advisory council. It's not like we're like consulting young people. The actual board of directors who control the finances, hiring, what we're doing with our programs is actually young people. And that's built into our governing document. So the youth leadership model is tangible and it's structural too.
Yeah. Wow. That's awesome. I love that you shared that. Thank you so much. So as we're jumping into the conversation, can we start by talking about sexual violence among teenagers? So can you share some information about it and why it is important to put prevention efforts towards sexual violence in young people?
Yeah, it's often a really difficult conversation because I think as a culture, we like to like look away and not think about sexual violence as something that can happen among young people and to young people. But we know from decades of research, right, that sexual violence really is prevalent among young people. The stats always vary, right? But we see that it's pretty common, right? A lot of young people are experiencing this all of the time and in different ways. And so I think that's one piece, right, that it is happening in their lives, and we have to really grapple with that. Especially when we're thinking about all of the proliferation of new technologies that are making forms of sexual violence so much easier. And so we're really seeing, even among like our younger students in middle school, the use of nudify apps and creating deep fakes of classmates is extremely prevalent. It's so accessible now. It's one app to download, and one of hundreds of these types of apps that are on the App Store that you can download and upload a picture of someone else and you can create a nude photo, and that can be deeply traumatizing to the survivor. But those tools are so accessible in a way that they just weren't 20 years ago, right?
Absolutely.
And so I think that we're really seeing with social media and AI, things are reaching younger and younger folks. So I think that's important. But the other piece is that once you graduate high school and you're sort of like entering the workforce or you're going into college, that transitional period is an extremely high risk, maybe the most high risk period for young people. And so traditional approaches to prevention have like met those individuals where they are. So, right, a lot of sexual violence prevention with young people was taking place on college campuses. Once they already got there, and we're already in this high-risk environment where all those environmental factors around, living on their own for the first time, being in such close proximity to other people, the use of alcohol is extremely prevalent on college campuses. And knowing that, right, prevention was reaching them once they were already there, not before they got there, so that we could really, inform the ideas about boundaries and intimacy and safety that young people would have, right? That needs to happen earlier. And so that was really our approach to thinking about sexual violence prevention, was wanting to give them the tools, the language, the knowledge before they were in these even more high-risk environments.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love all that. And what you said just about college, and I think about that a lot, that there is a lot of intervention efforts, prevention efforts, or awareness when it comes to college sexual violence and dating. But we know, like, you could take any topic ever, and early intervention is the best prevention.
Yep.
Like, I mean, like if you, I mean, I work with children and teens, but if we're thinking from like a developmental model and we're thinking of like a language delay or something like that, we always say like early intervention is the best, prevention, or it's, you're going to have better outcomes with early intervention. So it is interesting. That's the word I'm going to use to me, that like, okay, yes, we need to have this awareness in college and young adulthood and adulthood, but it's not like a flip is switched, suddenly you go to college and this happens. Like you've already said, it's happening younger and younger. And if we're not talking about it, if we're not equipping these young people with knowledge of what sexual violence even is, um, how to speak up, how to advocate for themselves, all those things, we're really like not. It's a loss in many ways. We're not preparing them. Hopefully, I want to say, hopefully people don't experience it, but we know that people are going to, and
Yeah.
so, you said earlier we like to avoid things. It's hard to talk about sexual violence, especially in young people. You talking about middle school, like that breaks my heart that it's happening earlier and earlier. And us turning a blind eye or pretending it doesn't happen is not going to fix anything. But if we know it's happening, we need to talk about it, and talk about it in a developmentally appropriate way, talk about it in an empowering way. So, like you said, people are equipped with the tools they need as they enter more risky, I don't know if that's the word you use, that's the word that's coming to mind, environments.
Yeah. I was just reading a recent, pretty large study that was looking at sort of sexual violence among young people and children
Mm-hmm.
and adolescents. And one of the findings that really struck me was that while parents often know about sexual harm that occurs in children under the age of 12, for young people and adolescents 12 to 17, the vast majority of parents had no idea that it had happened. And
Oh, wow.
that is what is so scary to me, is that like
Yeah.
there is just this lack of awareness. And sometimes I think it's because, right, I think that the kids that are 12 to 17, they might be a little bit more equipped at hiding it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Or like wanting or choosing not to disclose, right? And
Mm-hmm.
being particular about where they're disclosing. But I think part of it also is that like wanting to look away, and that
Mm-hmm.
refusal to have to grapple with what that means.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that finding just really struck me because it was so stark,
Mm-hmm.
um, and really worrying.
Yeah. Well, and even, this is anecdotal evidence, but thinking of like populations I've worked with in a clinical capacity, the amount of times I have worked with teens who have disclosed some type of sexual assault and the adults in their life had no idea, versus the younger kids I've worked with whose parents were much more aware. And I've also heard stories from teenagers where they maybe did disclose and they were met with dismissal or people not believing them. And I wonder if that's another component as well, versus if like an 8-year-old comes to you and says things, or it comes out like, and I agree with you. I think that 12 to 17 range, for better or worse, probably know how to hide things better. But I also wonder if there's a component of like not believing, or like, oh, the whole boys will be boys, or like that's just what teen dating is like normalizing harmful behaviors in our culture, because that's easier than admitting like, oh, there's something wrong and now I have to address the thing that's wrong.
Yeah, I think a lot of parents still have a lot of like misconceptions around all of the pieces of rape culture and
Mm-hmm.
what constitutes sexual violence, right? I mean, my generation, I'm 24, and we didn't get good consent education.
Oh, yeah.
So the generation above me and the one above that didn't receive any education like this at all. So
No.
they're still fully loaded with those like victim blaming myths
Mm-hmm.
and the weird misconceptions around what constitutes sexual assault or not, or who's to blame for something. And so I think a lot of that motivates these sort of negative, really harmful responses when a young person discloses. And so, I think there's a lot of effort that needs to happen on parental education around
Mm-hmm.
this topic too.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, like we've already talked about, I am over a decade older than you, so I'm millennial, and I don't remember any conversations about consent. Like even in like health class when we're learning like basics about like sex and things like that. Like I don't remember there being conversations really about sexual violence or like you said rape culture or anything like that. And there's probably this whole conversation of like should schools be teaching that or should it be parents or things like that. But the reality is, I mean, unless somebody is homeschooled or online schooled, um, this age range that we're talking about spends the majority of their time in school. And like we said earlier, they're the ones seeing the things happen, whether to themselves or their friends. And if we're not having conversations about it, it is going to lead to those questions of like, is it not blaming? Is this a normalized behavior? And we'll probably touch on this later, but the person that was the perpetrator, did they even realize what they did was
Yeah.
inappropriate, harmful, whatever it is? Or was it just normalized and that's what they were taught is okay when it wasn't? So I agree with you. I definitely think there needs to be more education for not only the teens, but also parents and older generations so that they can also be reinforcing right and wrong and this education. And also, like you said, it's evolving. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, AI has exploded just in the past couple of years.
Hmm.
I know it's been around for a lot more, but like access to AI, what the realisticness, that's not how real images look and things like that has gotten so much better. Middle schoolers having access to these apps even existing, all those things. And so these conversations are also ever evolving as what
Yeah.
constitutes as sexual violence.
We're already so behind and to have to be playing catch up with these like rapidly proliferating technologies is exhausting,
Oh, I'm
one.
sure.
And two, I mean, it is really difficult. It can be really difficult for folks to understand the technologies themselves, let alone these sort of like the harms that are happening, the layers of
Yeah.
complexity in how these technologies are being used. And so it is a huge challenge that
Mm-hmm.
really is going to take a lot of us to have to really grapple with. And I think we need to be grappling with it right now as we're looking at the future of these technologies. They don't seem to be
Yeah.
going away, unfortunately.
Oh, they're definitely not going away. Yeah, for better or for worse. So you just mentioned the word harm, and obviously there is a lot of harm that comes from being a survivor of sexual violence. But I know one thing that you and SafeBAE in particular are passionate talking about is the association between sexual violence among teenagers and suicide. So I did want to give you an opportunity to talk about this association. You can share why it's so important to SafeBAE if you desire. But I think this association really highlights the gravity of why we need to be focusing our attention to this population.
Yeah. Um, this is just one of those, like, one of the most difficult conversations and one of the most heartbreaking ones. I think for me, a large part of my motivation in doing sexual violence work does come from this suicide aspect.
Mm-hmm.
And just being absolutely devastated by the toll, the mental health toll of sexual violence that is completely preventable. And so, again, from sort of the decades and decades of research that we have, and from practitioners who've been doing this work for decades, we've always known that, right? The two things, sexual violence and suicide, are connected, right?
Yeah.
We've seen the link between them, and depending on the study, is either one of or the number one predictor of suicidal ideation among young people, particularly among young girls. And that is like really difficult to grapple with because it does change the conversation around sexual violence. I think the stakes are really high and it is life or death. And we're always talking about our work with this life or death frame, because we know that it is. And so SafeBAE bears that weight really personally. One of our co-founders, Daisy Coleman, who was a visionary trailblazer in leading these conversations and of pushing youth leadership and survivor-centered work. She really led so much of this with such heart and a belief that we could end sexual violence. And we lost her to suicide in 2020. And that incalculable loss really reaffirmed what we already knew, was that this devastating mental health crisis and suicide crisis was deeply related to the work that we were doing. And it wasn't until 2023, I believe, that that was the first time that the CDC, leveraging the data from the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, actually put out a report identifying the link between those two things.
2023?
2023 was the first time that they put out their big report that like these two things are actually connected. Like we really do. And for us, we're like, yes, we know. We're seeing it every day. We know the mental health crisis associated with sexual violence is so severe. And so many people have a challenge grappling with that. They don't see the two things as related. So much of SafeBAE's work in trying to raise the urgency around the work that we're doing is about bridging that gap. And saying, like, in a lot of people's mind, they go sort of like sexual violence is gender-based violence. So it's like it's a gender issue. It's like the feminist issue. It's a women issue. And then they leave it out of the public health conversation or the mental health conversation. And when you do that, structurally and systematically, it under-resources sexual violence prevention and response. Devastatingly so. And so much of what SafeBAE is trying to do is trying to say, hey, can we please include this in the conversation that we're having around suicide? Because we know that the two things are so linked. They're so connected. And I think like we're starting to see that like tide sort of shift and people engage in the conversation and take it a little bit more seriously. But there's still a lot of headway that has to happen. And so I think we're going to certainly continue leading that work and trying to do that conversation. You know, that's actually why I first reached out to you, of wanting to call in folks that are working in the sort of clinical fields and the mental health field and sort of center this conversation and really uplift the connection between these two things, because it is life or death. And we are like up against the clock constantly. You're constantly feeling that. And so I hope that the work that we're doing today continues to sort of honor Daisy's legacy as the trailblazer that she was, and prevents, you know, what happened to her from happening to anyone else. I really do see that as the primary work that we're doing right now.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And I know that SafeBAE as an organization definitely honors Daisy's legacy, and you have her story up on y'all's website and everything like that. And, you know, I obviously didn't know her, but just hearing her story, it shows that you can have a trailblazer like Daisy. You can have someone that told her story, that was putting in the work, using something that horrible that happened for good by, you know, co-founding this organization. And still, the trauma, the mental health crisis lingers. And the fact that, you know, as you were saying, like, people don't want to make the connection or acknowledge the connection. What I was thinking was, you know, we've already highlighted how sexual assault in general, but especially in younger people is a conversation that people don't want to have. Suicide is also a conversation people don't want to have and people misunderstand. And so if you take these two things that are difficult to talk about, people don't have a good understanding of, and it's easier to just ignore it and pretend it doesn't happen, of course people aren't going to see that the two are intrinsically related to one another. And as you said, then it's an uphill battle because you're not only trying to have hard conversations about one thing, you're trying to have hard conversations about two things, but then showing people that, but these hard conversations are intertwined and you can't have one conversation without the other. But people, unfortunately, for whatever reason, discomfort, their own belief system, misconceptions, just don't want to have them, which, like you said, then results in life or death situations because people are not being heard, they're being silenced. They silence themselves because they're like, nobody's gonna hear my story, listen to me, etc.
It really is the two sort of like the stigma and the taboo around each sexual violence and suicide. They interlock and they reinforce each other in such a way that it really, I think, obscures and makes it almost impossible to grapple with, right? Like it really keeps, even though we've seen like these conversations have been elevated in the
absolutely
discourse, it's so disheartening and shocking to see the way that they're still suppressed. And I think like that's extremely visible on like social media. And that a post that mentions sexual violence is instantly suppressed. A post that says suicide is super suppressed and it's no views. And you just have to wonder, like, why do we have these systems or these technologies or these policies that make it impossible to attend to the nuance and the complexity of the fullness of what is going on here and what can we do to stop it?
Yeah. Well, and even just going off social media, like you were talking about, because that is true. We know algorithms suppress keywords like suicide, sexual assault, sexual violence, things like that. And then for a while, like people were finding ways to like get around it. Like, I don't know if you remember, like Slewerside was like a thing or some other things. And like, I mean, full disclosure, there were definitely times like I did it or would put like stars in the middle of words, whatever. And then finally I was like, but if we're not even using the real words, if we're trying to find code words for it, then we're also avoiding the topic in a different way. We're making the word suicide, we're making the phrase sexual violence or sexual assault even more quote unquote bad because these platforms are saying like, hey, you can't do it. So now I just use the words, and if views get suppressed, they get suppressed. But, you know, I don't think we're going to change the narrative or have real conversations if we're having to tiptoe around even the words before we're even diving into the conversation.
Yeah. It really just sets up this like, it's just wild. It always is wild to me about how like an algorithm can create the sort of self-censorship structure. And I think that leaves out a lot of room for critical conversations. And when we take away the language and the vernaculars that we need to fully grapple with what we're talking about, we miss a lot of opportunities for, I think, reaching more people.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have clearly established sexual violence among young people is a problem. There's a high correlation between sexual violence among teens and youth and suicide leads to a lot of mental health concerns. So kind of moving the conversation to like what we can do about it. What would you say are some basic skills you believe teens need to be equipped with to prevent sexual violence?
Oh, that is great. That's I've got a 16 module curriculum for you.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, that's it. No,
we can link that in the show notes.
Perfect. Yeah, so what is the best way to answer this? I think
take your time.
I'm going to try to give you the most accurate, what I truly believe and what I think SafeBAE's approach is, which I think first and foremost of these type of skills is around like self-knowledge and wanting to equip young people with the knowledge and I think time and space to process and understand their own boundaries, their own desires, what they want. What do they want out of dating? What are they looking for out of intimacy? What are their beliefs around boundaries and safety and who they want to be friends with and why? And so that self-knowledge piece, I actually think is like the most critical thing that we're trying to do, particularly in that we're reaching people so young when they are forming those beliefs around boundaries and identity and intimacy and safety. And so I think the self-knowledge component is like core to what we are. Like I want people to understand their own boundaries, because once they do, it's a lot easier to be able to respect other people's boundaries, because you can understand why someone has them, what they mean to someone, why boundaries are important. And I think it sets you up for better relationships, whether that's with friends or even just like mentors, let alone like dating and sex. So self-knowledge first and foremost. The next one is how to support a survivor, how to respond when someone discloses something to you. We know that young people are more likely to tell a peer than anyone else. In particular, the first person they disclose to is likely going to be a peer. And we know that the first person that you disclose to as a survivor, their reaction is one of the biggest factors in predicting what your healing trajectory is going to look like. It can shape. It is a biological response to how that person reacts to you that can shape your healing trajectory. And so wanting to make sure that young people, right, have the knowledge so that they don't fall for any of the myths, that they don't start asking the wrong questions or interrogating them or victim blaming, and that they instead can actually receive that information, process it themselves, right? Because we want to avoid secondary trauma too. And adequately respond in a way that doesn't further traumatize the survivor that's disclosing to you. So how to support a survivor, how to respond to disclosures is like essential. It is so important. And it's difficult. That is like really challenging, right? Because I think sometimes your mind, you don't control what your first thought is when someone tells you something. You can sort of build up the skill set to be able to challenge those thoughts when they come and to be able to guide what your response is. So I think that's another big priority.
Absolutely.
And then the third piece, which just to gush on SafeBAE, I think SafeBAE is a trailblazer here, and they did it. They started this conversation before I was involved in the organization. So props to them, is just like the conversation of what to do when you get told that you've caused harm, or when you find out that a close friend or someone in your friend group has caused harm. SafeBAE created so we have our flagship program, the sort of certified peer educator training, and its first iteration went out in the world, and a group of young people came together and were like, y'all have a gap in this training. And it was, what do you do if you're accused of causing harm? And so SafeBAE worked with them and developed this entire module on like, what should you actually do? What does it look like to respond to finding out that you caused harm? And I think that is so essential because one, people are really likely to cause harm, even if it's not a severe form of sexual violence that was like intentional, right? You can still like cross someone's boundary in a minor way and then find that out and have a really negative reaction that can actually like make it a lot worse for everyone. Right. And so if you can, respond appropriately to finding out that you caused harm, I think that you can have better outcomes for yourself and for the other person. The other core piece there is finding out a friend did something wrong. What are your options when you're in a friend group with someone that you know and love and you find out that they hurt someone else that maybe you do know or maybe you don't? How do you respond to that? What are your options? And we often go to like one of two things, which is either like, oh, you have to like cancel that friend, kick them out of the friend group, like you cannot associate with them at all, or you have to like victim blame and not believe the survivor. And I'm telling you, we have to have some other options because neither of those things are useful or practical, right? Those things don't actually work. And so making sure that they have the skills to not enable a friend who's causing harm, but instead to support that person in taking accountability and moving towards repair. And so yeah, I think that was a lot of information, a lot of skills, but I think that those are really the core.
Yeah, but no, I agree. That was a lot of skills, but I think all three of those things that you highlighted are so important because the first one really focused on the individual. What are my boundaries? And also, like, I want to highlight your boundaries can change based on situation, but also if you have something in your mind, like, this is my hard boundary, this is a boundary that's flexible. If I am approaching this boundary and suddenly I'm uncomfortable, like, I have the right to set the boundary. But you also highlighted if we know our own boundaries, that helps us respect other people's boundaries as well, because a lot of people have different boundaries and that's okay. But if you know it's somebody else's boundary, you can be like, that might not be the same as my boundary, but I know what it feels to have a boundary violated or how it would feel to have my boundary violated. So I don't want to violate this person's boundary. The second point about our response with a disclosure, I think that is so important. It goes back to something we were already talking about with that 12 to 17 range and parents not being aware. If somebody discloses and has a bad reaction, yeah, they're not going to tell anyone else. Why would you? You don't want to risk, you've already gone through this trauma. You don't want to risk more people victim blaming, dismissing, minimizing, whatever it would be. Because it takes a lot of vulnerability and strength to even disclose to someone that you were a victim of sexual violence. And then to disclose that and get dismissed, you're not going to want to do that again. Versus if you disclose that and are heard and seen and validated, and somebody is like, what do you need in this moment? What can I help you do? Yeah, you have a support. And with support, you're more likely to open up and disclose. And then the third component, I think that is so important and something that is not talked about at all. And and we'll get to it in a couple minutes because I want to talk about VibeCheck here in a second. But I think we're not teaching individuals how to have those conversations, how to self-reflect. And yeah, if you're accused of doing something, I feel like for most humans, their natural reaction will be defensiveness and reactivity. And I completely agree with you on like the friend group thing, because you hear that all the time. It's like, I can't believe you still associate with so-and-so. It's like they have to be canceled, things like that. And it's very black and white thinking, all or nothing. Like there needs to be other options. And there's also like a difference between canceling someone and not giving them the chance to take accountability or ownership or do better versus somebody maybe that's like a serial perpetrator. Like those are different situations, yep. But we're not having nuanced conversations. We're just like, okay, bye, or that could never happen. And I think a theme throughout this is like there's so much nuance that needs to be discussed and had.
Yeah.
So I'll ask you about VibeCheck because this is a resource you created, right? Am I remembering that correctly? So can you talk about VibeCheck and why you created this resource?
Yeah. I'm so excited to talk about VibeCheck. It is like I'm extremely proud of what we've built at SafeBAE and what I've got this project that I've got to lead for this tool. But VibeCheck, which is available at checkyourvibe.org, is a self-reflection and accountability tool for young people who are questioning whether they caused harm. And so, right, SafeBAE has this history of grappling with some of the difficult questions around what to do if you're accused, and has had that conversation with young people about what happens if you've caused harm to someone. But over the last couple of years, we've had a lot of conversations, and we're really like looking at some troubling trends that we were seeing. And so one of those was young people sort of turning to Reddit forums and asking vulnerable questions around things like, I think I accidentally sexually assaulted someone, what do I do? Wow. I'm worried I crossed a boundary. I'm worried I caused harm. Someone said I caused harm and I don't know what to do. I'm scared. And seeing this huge number of posts on a ton of different Reddit forums and seeing really worrying responses that fell into that same trap of that sort of black and white thinking that you were talking about, of either one typical response to posts like that was like, oh, like there is no such thing as accidental sexual assault. You're an evil, you're a bad person. And often these messages would go as far as to say you should harm yourself.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, another type of response we were seeing was people say, oh, wait, no, you did absolutely nothing wrong. Like, you're perfect. Women suck. Like, women are evil. You're actually great. Why don't you come join this like group chat where we bond over hating women? And right, and we know that those group chats exist. I don't know if you saw the CNN reporting around like the Rape Academy and
Yep.
pipeline into the manosphere and in these dark parts of the web. But the entry point, it is a long road to get to Rape Academy. Those men didn't start there.
Yeah.
It starts in being invited into these private spaces where people can bond over shared misogyny or grievance around being accused of something. And that was extremely troubling to us. We're like, we are seeing a huge number of these posts, and we needed a better answer. At the same time, we started seeing young people turn to AI and chatbots and asking the same sort of questions. And then seeing, although people think like maybe these chatbots are better and offering better answers, they really weren't. We're seeing the same sort of troubling answers from these chatbots. And it's always important to note that, you know, all of these big AI companies with these large language learning models, whatever, they pride themselves on the fact that they scraped Reddit to build their responses to their chatbots. So we know that they're sourcing from Reddit threads, these threads in the responses they're giving to young people. And so we quickly realized one of the ways that SafeBAE needs to step up in this moment is to respond to those questions in a way that's like evidence informed, survivor centered, trauma informed, but also attending to a couple things. The platform affordances that Reddit and a chatbot offer. So things like it being like a private and anonymous space online, it just being a digital tool, meeting young people where they are, but also the being non-judgmental and not lectury and really speaking in their language. And so with that, as a team of young people, we started exploring what that would look like to build something out that could answer their questions honestly. And so we took all of those Reddit threads, we took like 400 of them that we found, and we did a content analysis of them to sort of pull out what were the questions that young people were asking, what were the main themes of where there was that uncertainty or that confusion, or what maybe they were already indicating might have been a factor in, you know, why the harm occurred, right? And so from that, we started building out this pathway model for the tool that is VibeCheck today, which sort of has some entry point questions of what brings you here. Things like, I think I accidentally sexually assaulted someone. I'm being accused of something I didn't do. I'm worried I crossed a boundary. And then walking them through sort of like micro educational modules on specific topics around what were some of these confusing factors. So they can select, there's dozens of different pathways and different things in there, but they can sort of explore like, well, you were drinking or substances were involved, or the other person, they pulled away or they froze. And in those modules, we offer like sort of like bro science around like, why did the body respond this way? Why did it happen? What is a freeze response? And can you understand what happened without, can you understand what happened and move towards an acceptance that maybe you did actually cause harm, even if you don't think that you meant to? And so that's really what the tool is trying to do, is provide that education, and in a way that's completely non-judgmental, and attend to their emotions and really try to call them in to say, maybe you didn't mean to do something wrong. Maybe that's true, but intent and impact are different things. And through our approach of this non-judgmental approach, using their language, the tools created by young people, can we get them to move closer towards a motivation for behavior change and a motivation for repair and taking accountability? And so the tool walks them through these educational modules and ultimately gives them a sort of next steps page that has a ton of different resources,
Yes.
a variety of tools taken from cognitive behavioral therapy and sort of gamified, different educational like learning modules adapted from our certified peer educator training. Full learning modules are in there. And then tools like how to apologize to someone. And so you can sort of like build an accountable apology through a sort of structured input activity in a way that I think when it comes to the repair builder, people are always like, well, why are you writing the apologies for them? We're not at all.
Yeah.
Giving them some guidance on what an apology looks like. And I really want them to spend the time filling that out and doing it rather than telling ChatGPT to write them
to write it for him. Yeah.
Right. One of them requires thinking and actual processing, the other doesn't. And so we offer a suite of actual resources for what they can do next to repair the harm that happened. That was a lot. I don't know.
It was great though, because I think, and I might have told you this when we first chatted and stuff, but I think VibeCheck is so unique in the sense that you're actually giving tools and resources to someone who may have perpetrated, or like we said, like that gray area. It's not as black and white as people make sexual violence out to be. There's a lot of nuance, and I think a lot of the conversation when it comes to sexual violence is resources for the survivor, or telling people just don't rape, just don't do this. And like, yes, don't. And like, obviously that approach is not working if sexual violence is still as rampant as it is. And I think about like, you know, the population that we're talking about, young people, if they're getting their information from Reddit, from ChatGPT, from online forums, from, I don't know, TV shows, from porn, like many young people don't have a true sense of like what is and what isn't, because like we said, so much of the conversation are black and white. And you know, yeah, it might be you know, they didn't say no, but I did notice that their body language was tight, or they froze, like you said, that freeze response, but they didn't say no. And it's like, okay, but does consent or non-consent have to be verbal? Like, are there other ways, or like picking up on body language? And so the fact that you all created this, one, it's much needed, but two, I hope many young individuals, and I mean, I told you this, like I went on it and just explored just to kind of get familiar with it. And like you said, there's so many education models, and it really made me, as obviously not a teenager, think about like teens I work with, or even when I was in high school. And it's like, yeah, conversation about alcohol and substances, and like, you know, the don't do drugs or don't drink approach doesn't work, or blaming people because they were under the influence also doesn't work. So all of that to say thank you for creating it, because I do think it is so needed.
Yeah, I think one of the things that you sort of reminded me of was like they didn't say no, but something feels off afterwards. We know that survivors don't really report. Like there's really low levels of reporting. So something might just feel off, or the survivor might like distance from you, and they're never going to tell you that directly. But I would still love the young person who feels like something was off. They don't entirely know what they did wrong. Use some of our tools to try to take accountability and move towards repair, because that can actually offer repair and survivor support to someone who otherwise wasn't going to actively seek those resources. And we actually would never know needed these things, because they're not going and filing a report, and they're not seeking the support that they need. So I think that there's this whole spectrum of harm that I really think that VibeCheck attends to in a way that other resources don't. And in our sort of internal conversations as a team and when talking to partners, I've started framing the tool as one of our, if not the most survivor-centered tools that we've ever made, in that it really takes the onus off of survivors for accountability and repair. So much of that is placed on the survivor to have to go do. And I would actually much rather the person that caused that harm be the one who has to, lift some of that burden and do some
Yeah.
of that labor. Um, and so I hope that that's what the tool is accomplishing out in the world. So far, I'm seeing a really positive reception to the tool and pretty highly elevated levels of uptake too.
Okay, good.
Yeah, so I'm really hopeful that this is making some impact with a population who we otherwise don't talk with.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Um, well, Drew, I mean, I could continue to talk to you forever. I know we're kind of wrapping up, getting close to the end of time. You've mentioned VibeCheck. You've mentioned the modules that SafeBAE has. I know SafeBAE also has the 360 degrees school programs. You have teaching guides, survivor support, blogs, like, and we'll lead everybody to SafeBAE's website. But in addition to SafeBAE, are there other resources or supports that you would recommend as somebody doing the work in this field for youth who are survivors of sexual assault?
Yeah, I think some of the best resources for young people, obviously, SafeBAE is great, but for survivors specifically, I think that all of the states in the United States have state coalitions for either sexual assault, sexual violence, domestic violence. They all have different titles, but you're going to have a state coalition that's doing a lot of this work and is sort of organizing your local agencies and rape crisis centers in the state. And so those places are doing amazing work. We partner with state coalitions and local agencies across the country, and you have brilliant people doing excellent survivor support programming. So I really encourage everyone to try to find their local agency first and their state coalition for resources there. I believe RAIN has a big directory of all the sort of different agencies, but there's a lot of ways you can get involved there.
Mhm.
And they really are great conduits for survivors across the country to get access to some of the resources that the sort of national orgs are creating.
Mhm.
Yeah, so that's where I send people.
Wonderful. Well, Drew, like I said, I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I could talk to you for hours upon hours more, but is there anything I haven't asked you about that you really want to highlight or touch on before? Obviously, I will ask you where people can connect with you and SafeBAE and all that kind of stuff. But anything that we haven't touched on that you think is really important to add to this conversation?
Yeah, I think that so as a youth-led organization, right, we were created to bypass adult gatekeeping, but we know that we need adult allies to support our young people. And so um, just in case there's anyone listening, there are a lot of ways for adult allies to get involved in the work. And we're actively always looking for adults to join our board of directors to help support our young people. And so right now we're really looking to recruit adults with access to financial or capital resources to amplify our work, folks with access to the press or media that can increase our visibility and put our resources in the hands of more people, and adults who are working in a variety of sectors from like legal and administrative to the clinical fields. There are so many ways for adults to actively get involved in giving power to young people and in creating new and bigger stages for young people to really lead this work. So I really want to encourage anyone that's listening that's like called to board service or to supporting young people to reach out to us at SafeBAE.
Awesome. And so, speaking of that, where can people reach out to SafeBAE, find out more, connect with you and everybody at SafeBAE doing such wonderful work?
Yeah, well, I want everybody to come visit safebae.org, but also our Instagram, safe_bae. It really is like our clearinghouse for putting out all the different resources that we're doing and connecting with folks. So really encouraging people to visit our website and visit our Instagram and see the amazing work that our young people are leading. We have so many young people who are creating brilliant resources and putting out amazing social media content. And so come check that out. You'll probably learn something. I'm learning
Yeah.
stuff from them all the time. They have such interesting perspectives on everything from media to policy to what prevention needs to look like. So
Yeah.
yeah, come check out our Instagram and make sure you visit our website.
And I will put links to those in the show notes, as well as checkyourvibe.org for VibeCheck and some of the other resources we've talked about during this conversation. But Drew, once again, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for sharing your knowledge, your expertise, everything that SafeBAE is doing. I just appreciate you, your time, and all the work that you all are doing for our young people.
Thank you. It was such a good conversation.
And thank you, the listeners, for joining for today's episode of Psych Talk, and I will catch you in the next episode. Bye. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Psych Talk. Please rate, review, and subscribe to the show. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with a friend. Don't forget to follow me on all socials at Jessica Lee, PhD, and the podcast at Psych Talk Podcast on Instagram.